Chapter 21. I remember that scent. 2. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 21. I remember that scent. 2. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Miss Mai's phone began ringing and her face changed almost immediately after looking at the caller ID. She put on a smile and said, Director Phone. Hello. A few seconds later, the unrest in Miss Mai's expression began to increase. By the time she hung up, she had nearly crushed the phone with her bare hands. Yan Qingxi asked, "What's up?" Miss Mai cursed, King hell. We're so close yet so far. This won't do. I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. A clarification was finally obtained after making a series of 7 or 8 calls. I've gotten someone to ask around, and apparently, the young master from the Luo clan's company recommended a fresh female talent and even gave plenty of financial assistance. Now we don't even have the TV role. Miss Mai felt defeated. There was no way to turn back time now that things have progressed so negatively. She lambasted angrily, these businessmen are always meddling and interfering in other people's dealings. Yan Qingxi narrowed her eyes. Luo clan. Is his name Luo Jinchuan? How did you know? An acquaintance. Who did he recommend? Xue Zheng, the winner of last year's Best Newcomer Award. Yan Qingxi recalled the words that Luo Jinchuan told her the other day. She laughed grimly. It seemed he resorted to playing dirty by seizing her opportunities away from her. You've got balls, Luo Jinchuan. There was absolutely no way she would let it slide. Yan Qingxi faced the still raging Miss Mai and said, "Ask Xiao Su to come and doll me up. I'm going to meet someone." Who? Yan Qingxi's beautiful, almond-like eyes were filled with enthusiastic vengefulness. Collecting a debt. Motherf *Ker, he'll have to pay up for last night. Almost immediately, Miss Mai no longer felt as irritated as she was before. Right. I'll make the call. Once Xiao Su was phoned, Miss Mai asked, "Are you sure that he'll help you?" Yan Qingxi replied, "Let me tell you this. If he can't help me, no one in the whole of Luo City could help me. If I manage to get a hold of him, you won't ever have to worry about hidden hands and dirty tricks again. For real. Less talk, more action. Quick." An hour later, the car stopped in front of Yu Clan Corporations. Xiao Su asked, "Miss Qingxi, are you sure you want to go in? Security's really tight here, and anyone who doesn't have an employee card won't be able to enter." Yan Qingxi had gotten down from the car before he finished his words. Xiao Su ran down and followed close behind. To his surprise, Yan Qingxi was allowed in after she whispered something to security. Before Yan Qingxi could go further though, the young miss at the reception stopped her. "Miss, may I know who it is you're looking for?" Yan Qingxi took off her glasses. "Yu Tingfeng." Naturally, the young lady was quite taken aback that Yan Qingxi was looking for their big boss. "This. I'm sorry, do you have an appointment?" Yan Qingxi leaned forward. "Does a bedroom appointment count?" It was not a reply that the young lady expected. Her face turned red and she had no idea how to respond. A burst of laughter prompted the young lady to turn her head, the relief on her face suggested that she saw her saving grace. "Manager Wu, this lady is looking for CEO Yu, but she doesn't have an appointment. What's your business with CEO Yu?" In the blink of an eye, a handsome young man was standing in front of her. Vibrant was his looks and elegant was his sword-like eyebrows. A certain magnetism was present in his chiseled face. Yan Qingxi shot him a look. Collecting a debt .org. He leaned against the front desk and crossed his arms in front of his chest. A kind of half-smile was present as he laid his eyes on her. "That's interesting. Tell me, what does he owe you?" He was a tall man, and his height intimidated Yan Qingxi slightly, especially when he was close to her. Chapter 22. I remember that scent. 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 22. I remember that scent. 3. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. She swiftly took a step back. I couldn't possibly tell you what he owes me, now could I? Even if I told you, would you be able to repay me on his behalf? Wu Fang's was intrigued. Well, that depends on what it is. Try me. For example. Yan Qingxi smiled. For example, sleeping with someone, then putting on your pants and disappearing quietly the next day. I don't really care if the son .a.b *tch doesn't pay for the room, but he even took away my cell phone. Are you able to manage this kind of debt? Those words contained too much lurid information. Wu Fang found everything hard to stomach, and realizing that it was not an easy debt to manage indeed. Wu Fang rubbed his nose and asked, are you sure it's our CEO? If he's not the B** I'm looking for, who could it be then? You. Wu Fang looked at Yan Qingxi from head to toe. Brave maiden, this one. But I'm really curious about what she said. Is Yu Tingfeng short on money? That he'd sleep with someone without footing the bill, and even steal their phone. He muttered apprehensively, well, I'm not that much of a B****. The bare minimum that he would do was pay for the room, if not in full, then at least in part, when he hooked up with a lady friend. Wu Fang spotted someone and shouted, Special Assistant Jiang. This lady's looking for CEO Yu. Jiang Lai caught sight of Yan Qingxi the second he went out of the elevator. Try as he may, his attempt to hide from her failed as his own colleague ratted him out. With no other choice but to stop and turn around, his eyes met with Yan Qingxi's ink-like pupils. Yan Qingxi made a come-hither movement toward Jiang Lai. Her fair and delicate fingers coupled with her red-painted nails were so alluring that they could enchant anyone's soul. Jiang Lai sighed and walked over. Miss Qingxi, it's been a while. A numb scalp characterized every interaction he had with her, though it was more out of fear than loathing. Yan Qingxi smiled, not bad. You still remember me even though it's been 3 years since we last met. Seems like I still have a place in your heart. Bring me to Yu Tingfeng. Her expression suggested that he was in a bit of a pickle. CEO's in a meeting. How about another day? A change of date was scarcely in her plans. What does his meeting have to do with me? I want to see him. As much as Jiang Lai wanted to put on a poker face, it was not something he could readily do in front of Yan Qingxi. You. Please don't put this burden on me. Yan Qingxi nodded. Sure. I won't burden you. Just send a message to him. This SL*T isn't someone he can just sleep with as he pleases. He even F*King stole my phone. His wealthiness must have made him go nuts. Jiang Lai's ears were thoroughly red, for he was being rebuked so severely inside the confines of the company that he worked for. Although the castigation was not directed at him, he still felt its humiliating effects. In that case, I'll make a call. Jiang Lai picked up the phone and dialed a number. Hey, CEO Yu. Barely 3 words were spoken and his hand was empty, the phone having been snatched away by Yan Qingxi. She placed it to her ear and said sarcastically, Did you sleep well last night, uncle? You disappeared as soon as the sun got up. Were you really that worried that I'll ask you to pay for the room? In the 3 years since we last met, don't you think that my body is still as sexy as ever? Is your mouth sore from biting me the whole night? Do you want me to give you a kiss? Chapter 23. I remember that scent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 23. I remember that scent. Nav OM Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. All 3 of them, Jiang Lai, Wu Fang, and the lady from the front desk, were so red-faced that their cheeks resembled the buttocks of a baboon. Was the B** starred that Miss Yen spoke of really the CEO that everyone looked up to? No one knew what the person on the other end of the phone said, but a few seconds later, Yan Qingxi threw the phone back to Jiang Lai. Let's go. Jiang Lai placed his phone back into his pocket and did not dare to press on any further. After you. Curious, Wu Fong followed closely behind. Once they reached the 30th floor, Yan Qingxi saw through the glass wall of the meeting room that Yu Tingfeng really was in a meeting. Not only was the soundproofing expertly done, the glass walls were also incredibly crystal clear, to the point where Yu Tingfeng's facial features could be seen with the utmost clarity. The CEO's seat was exclusively for him, while further down the table were the various heads of departments seated on either side. In Yan Qingxi's opinion, no other man could rival Yu Tingfeng's in terms of sheer breathtaking greatness. She admitted to herself that she was a fetishist for good looks. His face was the only one she remembered during the past 3 years, for the sole reason that he was a pretty boy. He was so good-looking that her heart was rocked to its core. Jiang Lai remarked, CEO is really having a meeting. Is it alright if you wait for a while? Yan Qingxi stared intently at Yu Tingfeng. How long till it ends? Jiang Lai hesitated to answer, I think. Well, I can't say for sure. Yan Qingxi was not one to wait. Yu Tingfeng's calm composure and aloof manner stirred the fire within her heart. How could someone do what he did to her and still have a clear conscience? Yan Qingxi wanted to get the B** starred back whenever she thought about all the good deeds he did to her the night before. She stretched her hand out and pushed the door, prompting Jiang Lai to stop her immediately. Miss Qingxi, you can't go in. Yan Qingxi pushed him away. I insist on going in. Jiang Lai was afraid to lay a hand on her, all he could do was stare at her as she pushed open the door and walked into the conference room. The entire room fell silent as soon as Yan Qingxi entered. Yu Tingfeng ignored her presence and said, continue. The department head who was presenting hurriedly picked up where was left off, we've done an extensive survey of the market. Those between the age bracket of 16 to 40 seem most promising. We can focus on this group of people and listen to their suggestions, which we can then use to make improvements to the product. Yan Qingxi took slow steps toward Yu Tingfeng, but his expression did not deviate much from earlier. A few comments on the presentation escaped his thin lips. This report isn't detailed enough. Make a fresh one with more detail and have it sent to my office. She glanced at him once more and noticed his lack of reaction. Nothing seemed to change, and he looked as though he forbade himself from being affected by her presence during work hours. Her lips crept into a smile. She bent her waist suddenly and placed her palms on the table, pressing herself onto his upper body and saying sarcastically, Mr. Yu, can you see me now? Yu Tingfeng continued ignoring her. He knocked on the table and urged those dumbfounded department heads, continue. Yan Qingxi lifted Yu Tingfeng's chin. You've already slept with me, you know. Why the F***ck are you still pretending? The angle with which she bent down was sufficient for him to glance through her low-cut V neck collar and see her cleavage. It was a treat for his eyes when he spotted a peach flower printed on her snow-white skin. His eyes turned frigid and he gently moved Yan Qingxi's arm away. Continue. Who's next? Don't even think about leaving if we haven't addressed the key issues of this season's performance. Yan Qingxi smiled and nodded. Really, Yu Tingfeng. Don't force me to use my lethal skills. Chapter 24. I remember that scent. 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 24. I remember that scent. 5. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yu Tingfeng remained indifferent throughout the entire ordeal. Yan Qingxi tossed her bag to one side, took off her jacket, and slapped her hand on Yu Tingfeng's chest. The last action scared everyone witless. Though Jiang Lai was far off at the door, he covered his eyes and turned around immediately, while Wu Fang found the whole thing intriguing and continued peering in. Jiang Lai pulled him. "Manager Wu, I advise you to turn around." Wu Fang asked, "Why shouldn't I continue watching? This woman's creating a disturbance. Shouldn't we call security? You know how CEO Yu is. If he didn't consent to it, Miss Qingxi would have been kicked out long before she even stepped foot into the meeting room." All of a sudden, Wu Fang's eyes widened. F***CK. She's vicious. Yan Qingxi's hands were still touching Yu Tingfeng by the chin, forcing him to look directly at her. Meanwhile, her other hand reached behind, grabbing the zipper of her dress and undoing it. Yu Tingfeng flung his pen onto the table and ordered coldly, "The meeting's over. Everyone get out." It took less than 5 seconds for the meeting room to be deserted, with nothing left behind. "Why not keep pretending then, if you have what it takes?" Yan Qingxi asked. "Can't you be more modest?" "Nope." He pushed her hand away. "Why are you here?" She backed off a couple of steps. "Last night, you promised me the lead role for The Scent of Her. Don't play stupid." Leaning back lazily on the chair, he brushed a finger against his lower lip and narrowed his eyes. "What lead role? What last night? Why don't I remember anything?" Yu Tingfeng's words made Yan Qingxi feel like she was bitten by a dog the night before. She laughed in irritation. "Yu Tingfeng, why haven't I ever noticed that you were this shameless? You slept with this B***tch last night, but when morning came you put on your pants and just sneaked off. You even took my phone with you. Are you a man or not, Yu Tingfeng? I suppose you're so poor that you just went bonkers." Yu Tingfeng glanced at the little marks on her neck and coldly said, "Is that so? You're sure the man you slept with was me?" A pang of hurt stabbed her heart, followed by an onset of despondent feelings that came without warning. It was true that many people called her unrestrained and wanton. Betting her was not difficult as long as one were from the opposite sex. Even though she scarcely took to heart the things that everyone else said about her, it was unpleasant to hear those remarks coming from Yu Tingfeng's mouth. Yan Qingxi's expression turned vacuous. Her immediate thought was to reclaim whatever that remained of her dignity in front of that man. She bent down and picked up her bag, fishing through it for her purse and taking out a small coin. She then threw it onto Yu Tingfeng's face. Yan Qingxi lifted her head high and allowed herself to be enclosed in a virtual shell. Nothing could bring her down now. She nodded and smiled. "You're right, I must have made a mistake. I do have a lot of men after all, so it isn't surprising. I'm sorry, Mr. Yu, I mistook you for the B***starred last night. This is to compensate for wasting your precious time." Yan Qingxi grabbed her bag and left without even taking her jacket. Her long hair trailed behind her as she took large strides forward. She put on her glasses and looked as magnificent as ever, without even the slightest indication of what a sorry figure she actually was. Jiang Lai opened the meeting room door in advance, and Yan Qingxi left without looking back. Wu Fang shouted from behind her, "Hey beautiful, let's get a drink when you're free." Her footsteps halted and she turned to flash a devilish grin at him. "I'll only meet with men in the bedroom." Chapter 25. I'm nothing but a slut in his eyes. When you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 25. I'm nothing but a slut in his eyes. One translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Her footsteps halted and she turned to flash a devilish grin at him. "I'll only meet with men in the bedroom." Wu Fang. A loud clatter prompted Jiang Lai and Wu Fang to turn their heads. The laptop that had been on his desk lay broken in half on the floor. Wreckage and a shattered screen were all that remained. Yu Tingfeng remained seated, with his upper body still tidying, his emotions still unwavering. His handsome grace and calm composure belied the fact that it was he who destroyed the laptop. He cast a sidelong glance and said, "Wu Fang. Come in." Despite the unassuming tone of his voice, Jiang Lai felt a chill creeping up his spine. It was inevitable that Yu Tingfeng would look menacing, especially when he was so calm. Yan Qingxi was long gone by then. Wu Fang held the door handle but was incredibly reluctant to go in. Jiang Lai saw that something was not quite right and wondered if Wu Fang had noticed it too. Yu Tingfeng looked at Wu Fang and uttered a single word. Now. Jiang Lai knew that Yu Tingfeng had reached his limit. Yu Tingfeng should not be forced to repeat himself a third time because if that happened, Jiang Lai might also be facing his wrath. Jiang Lai urged on. Go, Manager Wu. Afraid, Wu Fang mumbled, no. Jiang Lai did Wu Fang an unkind favor by pushing open the door and shoving Wu Fang in. Inertia did the rest and admitted Wu Fang into the room. He halted his steps as abruptly as the sudden braking of a car. Elder cousin. What is it? As college mates and distant cousins, calling him elder cousin seemed proper on account of Yu Tingfeng's seniority. From out of nowhere, the coin appeared between Yu Tingfeng's index and middle finger, shuttling back and forth between them with much liveliness. Sit, Yu Tingfeng ordered. Wu Fang stood 180.7 centimeters tall, but his forehead was practically soaked with sweat. He sat down slowly and carefully. Surprisingly though, Yu Tingfeng's queries were all company-related. It involved the suggestions Wu Fang had put forth regarding the current year's operations. As the conversation continued, Wu Fang let his guard down, thinking to himself that perhaps CEO Yu did not take the bold girl too seriously. After all, she was just another female who did not merit being Yu Tingfeng's subject of rumination. Upon finishing the discussion of work matters, Wu Fang had worked up enough courage to ask, cousin, when did you get involved with such a ferocious woman? She's a hot one. Her temper's red hot and her body's even hotter. Those perky T*TS and that round A*S, her jugs are probably a C cup at least. Yu Tingfeng glanced briefly at the womanly windbreaker-like jacket that was lying on the floor. Is there anything else? Wu Fang's gossipy side began surfacing. Did you really sleep with her last night? She said you stole her phone. Did you really take it, cousin? Yu Tingfeng's fingers ceased fiddling with the coin, allowing it to drop into his palm. He looked up and said, Wu Fang, I've been very satisfied with your work ethic and your results as of late. The sudden change of topic left Wu Fang feeling stupefied. However, he still managed to blurt out in haste, thank you so much, CEO Yu. I'll continue to do my best. Yu Tingfeng continued, the company has recently decided to assist in the construction of 50 primary schools in the highlands, at no cost. I think it'd be perfect if you were the person in charge. Wu Fang was absolutely dumbfounded. Cousin, I mean. CEO Yu. Any objections? Yu Tingfeng shot him a stare. That stare subjected Wu Fang to a chilly feeling and he immediately shook his head, no. Not at all. Why would I object? Then you'll leave with the group at 1 o'clock this afternoon. What? This afternoon? Wu Fang thought that he would have at least a few extra days to himself, where he could ask for favors or perhaps wait until the man in front of him was less angry so a discussion could be held, but that was not to be. Yu Tingfeng did not give him the liberty of time. Chapter 26. I'm nothing but a slut in his eyes too. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 26. I'm nothing but a slut in his eyes too. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation F** King Ruthless. It was already 11 o'clock, meaning there were less than 2 hours left to prepare. Yu Tingfeng looked at Wu Fang's expression and said, in order to fully express the company's philosophy of benevolence and charity, I hope you'll see through the construction of all 50 schools, from the beginning until the very end. Whenever it finishes, that's when you'll come back. He then stood up and patted Wu Fang on the shoulder. I have the utmost faith in you, little cousin. Wu Fong thought to himself, F***ck, it's a move designed specifically to shut me out. It would be the death of him to oversee 50 Highland primary schools from start to finish. Ack. Jiang Lai caught up hurriedly to Yu Tingfeng and entered the CEO's office. Yu Tingfeng then stretched out his hand. Jiang Lai's mind was briefly unable to process anything, but soon after, he quickly rummaged through own pockets and fished out a white smartphone. It was already unlocked by the time Yu Tingfeng took it, and the first app he tapped on was the photo album. Many a picture filled the gallery, but most of those images were that of scenery and only a few were shots of people. Among those few was a picture of a man and a woman. Smiling happily at the camera was a handsome male foreigner and Yan Qingxi. The man placed his arm around Yan Qingxi's neck, with both their heads leaning intimately against each other. Jiang Lai laid eyes on the phone briefly before looking down. Was the phone about to shatter into pieces at the very next moment? Without warning, Yu Tingfeng launched something through the air. Fortunately, Jiang Lai managed to catch it thanks to his acute reflexes. Destroy it. Jiang Lai nodded frantically and said, yes. He went out with the smartphone in hand and breathed out a long, drawn sigh. Miss Sun, the secretary, held some documents intending to go in, but she asked Jiang Lai beforehand, is it okay to go in? Jiang Lai gestured by waving no, then proceeded to make a throat-slitting motion. Don't dig your own grave. Yan Qingxi returned to her rental room, where Miss Mai had been waiting for her. Impatience could be heard from Miss Mai's question. So. Yan Qingxi collapsed onto the sofa and said, it's a fail. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, without giving away any inkling of her current mood and state of mind. Miss Mai wanted to chastise Yan Qingxi, but the latter's downtrodden demeanor elicited more pity than anger. Miss Mai cursed out, there's no such thing as a good man. All you can do is count on your own self in the future. You can't place any hope in them. You're right. Yan Qingxi mumbled. Hope could be placed only on oneself, not others, trust no one and rely only on oneself. Those thoughts floated in Yan Qingxi's mind, leaving her on the verge of a bitter laugh. Why would someone like Yu Tingfeng come to her aid after 3 years of her absence? What was his reason for helping her? The fact that she slept with him once 3 years ago. A man like Yu Tingfeng had no shortage of women to choose from. Who did Yan Qingxi think she was? Yan Qingxi was no more than a slut in his eyes. Yes, a slut. How could she be a good character when she seduced her aunt's man? Even if she did spend the previous night with him, it was she who voluntarily hit on him. It would have been a loss for him if he did not sleep with her. Miss Mai was familiar with the cold harsh truth of the world, but if she could leave a good employer and open up her own studio, it was because she saw something special in Yan Qingxi. Miss Mai's spirits were not to be dampened. I'll look for an old friend. Recently she's been shooting a film too, but it'll be broadcasted on the internet instead of the mainstream because they kept production costs low. With our current situation, we can't be choosy. I'll bring you to meet her later, Yan Qingxi nodded. Okay. There were still a couple of things Miss Mai wanted to say, but when she looked at Yan Qingxi's lethargic face, all she could do was pat Yan Qingxi's shoulder. Rest well, that I'll be going now. Miss Mai got up and went for the door. Her hand was about to reach for the handle when she heard Yan Qingxi's mumbling behind her. Miss Mai. The feeling when someone tramples over your dignity, it's really unbearable. Chapter 27. I want to slaughter Yu Tingfeng. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 27. I want to slaughter Yu Tingfeng. 1. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Miss Mai's hand stopped midair. Yan Qingxi's words were like a stab to the heart. Miss Mai replied, you're right, it's unbearable, so we'll work hard. When your anger reaches boiling point, we'll see if anyone dares to step on your head. Yan Qingxi giggled. You're right. When I've reached breaking point, I'll F** King kill them all. Plump though she was, Miss Mai was known for her swift and decisive temperament. The next evening, she arranged a meeting with her old friend and brought Yan Qingxi along. It was held in a hot-pot shop that received an investment from a celebrity in the showbiz milieu. Miss Mai told Yan Qingxi. My friend had some good news for us the other day. She said that she received an unexpected investment from a big corporation. Money isn't a problem now. There's no need to fret about the publicity too. We don't have anything to be worried about for this role. A nod from Yan Qingxi. The old friend that Miss Mai spoke of was a female director, whose surname was Kai. At 40 years old, the extremely slender Kai Lanyuan sported a bob and wore glasses, exuding the grace and charm of an artsy character. She was stunned when she laid eyes on Yan Qingxi. Oh, Lao Mai, you really do have an ace up your sleeve. No wonder you were brave enough to leave the agency. Miss Mai replied, I'm broke and I only have one actress with me. It's all in your hands. Yan Qingxi dressed herself up with much elegance, albeit at the expense of her allure, which was dimmed somewhat. She greeted politely, Director Kai, it's nice to meet you. My name is Yan Qingxi. I hope you'll let me learn from you. No problem, no problem. Anyone that catches Lao Mai's eye will never be inferior. Miss Mai and Director Kai were longtime friends, and because there were no outsiders at the table, they spoke freely and casually. Intent on lending Miss Mai a helping hand, Director Kai turned to Yan Qingxi. The film editor and screenwriter will be joining us in a bit, just in time for you to meet them. All right. I'm grateful, Yan Qingxi said. Not long later, the film editor and screenwriter arrived. A smile was already prepared on Yan Qingxi's face when she stood up, but it disappeared instantly upon recognizing a third person behind the two. Director Kai stood up at once. CEO, you're having dinner here too. Yu Tingfeng gave a friendly smile. I met Mr. Wang just now and heard that you were having a meal here, so I thought I'd come to say hi. Director Kai introduced him to Miss Mai and Yan Qingxi. Let me introduce him to you. This here's Yu Tingfeng. Mr. Yu's the one who invested in the movie. In all her life, Director Kai never would have imagined that the Yu clan would invest in a movie whose cast and crew were relative unknowns. Even more surprising was the fact that the Yu family's young master came to greet them as though he was an ordinary citizen. The entire sequence of events felt dreamlike. Yan Qingxi was practically struggling to contain herself from tearing Yu Tingfeng's face apart. Heh, Yu Tingfeng. The Yu family's young master. Coming to that kind of place to have a meal. Boolsh *T. No wonder Miss Mai said that Director Kai managed to secure financial backing on that very day, it was from none other than Yu Tingfeng. Yan Qingxi was really curious as to what he was up to. Her unease was quickly spotted by Miss Mai after the latter greeted Yu Tingfeng. She tugged on Yan Qingxi's clothes and whispered, Qingxi. Without missing a beat, Yan Qingxi flashed her signature smile. It was a perfect one, just like the kind that should be present in one's face when meeting a stranger for the first time. She said, Mr. Yu. It's nice to meet you. I'm Yan Qingxi. Yu Tingfeng's pinkish thin lips curled up. Nice to meet you, Miss Yan. He extended his hand. She gnashed her teeth in anger and finally realized how much the Yan family truly hated her. Chapter 28. I want to slaughter Yu Tingfeng. 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 28. I want to slaughter Yu Tingfeng. 2. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After a deep breath, Yan Qingxi stretched out her arm reluctantly and shook hands with Yu Tingfeng. Causing a scene with Yu Tingfeng was no option, not when she was in front of Director Kai. Yan Qingxi's chance was there and she had to hang on to it with both her hands. She must not put Miss Mai in an awkward position either. Since Yu Tingfeng pretended as though he did not know her, she had no reason to act otherwise. Revenge must not be done in haste. Yan Qingxi planned to shake his hand only briefly, but she did not expect him to grab tightly onto her the instant her hand came into contact with his. It was a strong grip and there was nothing she could do to release herself from it. He eventually let her go just as her fury was about to explode. As their hands parted, Yu Tingfeng's finger grazed her palm. All she felt was a deep-seated disgust. None of the people there were idiots, everyone could sense that something was not quite right between both of them, but they simply acted as though they did not see anything. The film editor was a fat, middle-aged man, with a bald head, who gave off the impression of being something of a lowlife. He said, "Mr. Yu, have you eaten? Please join us if you haven't." "Sure." Yan Qingxi's teeth nearly cracked from all her gnashing. She was not going to just swallow up all the disgust she was feeling, she wanted to find a way to get back at him. Whether intentionally or otherwise, Yu Tingfeng chose to sit at Yan Qingxi's right, making sure that he was very close to her. Once everyone sat, Yan Qingxi took a wet napkin from her bag and began using it to wipe her hands. Back and forth she went until her palms were red. Yu Tingfeng narrowed his eyes. The first topic of discussion after everyone sat was the movie. The conversation centered around things such as where to shoot the scenery and who should be chosen for which role. They were all eating with gusto, their heads dripping in sweat. Yu Tingfeng was the only person who did not touch his chopsticks, all he did was drink 2 sips of water. Yan Qingxi observed everything from the corner of her eye and sneered. The Yu family's young master would never eat from the same pot as others because he found it unhygienic. Things such as sliced beef, tripe, blood curd, and sheep's brain were all delicacies for the others, but not him. Yu Tingfeng always ate the best quality food available, his insisted on having Kobe beef, foie gras that was sourced from Calais, Kansas, beluga caviar, white truffles that everything must be of the highest quality. Yan Qingxi knew he was a fussy person from the very first moment she laid eyes on him. Putting it in Yan Qingxi's words, never have I ever seen such a high-maintenance man. He was lucky simply because the Yu family was capable of meeting his needs. Yu Tingfeng's presence made Yan Qingxi feel mocked. She grabbed a glass of alcohol and downed it in one go, letting the fiery hot drink slide down her throat. Yan Qingxi's felt a stirring in her heart. That douchebag Yu Tingfeng was sitting right beside her and she would be damned if she did not do something to him. She placed her glass down and leaned to him with a huge grin on her face. "Mr. Yu, why aren't you eating? You haven't touched your chopsticks at all." Yu Tingfeng scanned his eyes past her. "I'm not hungry." Yan Qingxi then remarked cordially, "Really? Well, even if you're not hungry, you've got to at least try something. Aren't we all sitting here to enjoy our meal? It wouldn't be nice of you not to touch your chopsticks. The tripe's really good. Try it." She very graciously took some for him. A thick layer of red chili oil coated the tripe as it made its journey out of the pot. It looked incredibly spicy, and it just so happened that Yu Tingfeng did not take spicy food. The sight of reddish oil and whitish filaments made him feel dizzy. His fingers tensed up and he frowned at Yan Qingxi. She looked him directly in the eye and had a cold grin at the corner of her lips. Provocation was rife in her eyes. Chapter 29. Ignoring him was the best option. One You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 29. Ignoring him was the best option. One translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. She stopped short of telling him. "Yes, I'm doing this on purpose. What ya gonna do about it?" Seeing as Yu Tingfeng still did not touch his chopsticks, Yan Qingxi asked again, "You don't like that one? How about some sliced beef?" Yan Qingxi took a few slices and gave it to him. His stomach churned at the sight of the food, but his expression gave nothing away. She was not about to let him off the hook just yet. If Yu Tingfeng still did not touch his chopsticks, Yan Qingxi would continue piling food onto his plate. Her act of sleeping with him 2 nights ago was done in vain, He bit her and left marks all over her body. He even humiliated her the day before. All that resentment and indignation she felt toward him had yet to dissipate, and she was adamant to act out those feelings on him. Miss Mai looked on with a frown. She knew Yan Qingxi well and deemed it out of character for the latter to be so rude. Judging from the situation, Yan Qingxi was not cozying up to Yu Tingfeng, but rather, she seemed disgusted at him. What was she playing at here? Did she not know that the Yu's clan's young master was not to be provoked? Miss Mai worried silently to herself. She wanted to give Yan Qingxi a little reminder but was afraid that doing so would be too abrupt. Yu Tingfeng looked at Yan Qingxi's dazzling face. Are you that eager for me to eat? A hint of arousal seemed to trail off from his last syllable, evoking a sense of curiousness in those who were present. Though it seemed insignificant, it surprised everyone because it gave the impression that there was more to the two of them than meets the eye. Smiling, Yan Qingxi responded, yes. I'm waiting to see if you'll do me the honor, Mr. Yu. Just as she was certain that Yu Tingfeng would not touch the chopsticks, he went and picked up a pair. Instead of his own, however, he used hers. His elegant, fair fingers were a pleasant sight even though all they did was pick up some chopsticks. He took an oil-tinted slice of beef and placed it in his mouth. It was the first time in his entire life that he actually ate something like that. He swallowed it whole without even chewing on it. Yan Qingxi had a look of astonishment as Yu Tingfeng ate it. Soon enough, the sound of his uncontrollable coughing was heard. The spiciness induced a coughing fit and it did not take long for his face to turn red. Yan Qingxi had an innocent look when she said, "You don't take spicy food. Why didn't you say something? I'm so sorry." Yu Tingfeng drained an entire glass of water and wiped his lips dry using his handkerchief. Anyone else would look sloppy and ill-mannered if they did what he just did, but Yu Tingfeng looked exceptionally elegant when executing those motions. Still seething with anger, Yan Qingxi put on a hypocritically sympathetic face and said, "I'm so sorry. It didn't cross my mind that CEO you can't handle spicy food. Why didn't you tell me?" The last thing Director Kai wanted was to offend her god of wealth. She immediately remarked, "If we knew, we could have cooked it in the clear soup." "I'm really sorry about that." Yu Tingfeng began to feel more and more annoyed at Yan Qingxi's fake demeanor. He deliberately commented, "Don't worry about it. How could I refuse when a beautiful woman offers me food?" By then, the entire table was looking at Yan Qingxi in utter confusion. She gritted her teeth so hard that they nearly cracked. "If you put it that way, would you drink a cup of poison if a pretty lady gave some to you?" Yu Tingfeng maintained a poker face and replied, "That depends on who's serving it." There was no way Yan Qingxi could continue smiling because Yu Tingfeng was stringing her up on purpose. She downed another glass of alcohol, but this time it failed to quell the anger within her. And so, she searched for his foot under the table and stomped down forcefully. With stilettos adorning her feet, specifically one that had a thin, 5 cm high heel, she stepped down with all her might. It was akin to hammering a nail, and Yan Qingxi even made sure to give his foot a good grinding. Chapter 30. Ignoring him was the best option. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 30. Ignoring him was the best option. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation BNOL.M. Despite that, there was not the slightest fluctuation in Yu Tingfeng's face. Dissatisfied, she twitched her lip and tried to be patient, but when she began to retract her leg, she was unable to move it at all. Yu Tingfeng's legs clamped down on her calf like a pair of pliers. Regardless of how much force she exerted, she could not break free of his grip. Not only that, his hand was even crawling up her thigh. He was about to have his way with her right in front of everyone else. In Yu Tingfeng's mind, Yan Qingxi was nothing but a woman that he could play with as and when he pleased. She felt for the back of his hand and pinched down as hard as she could, but instead of moving away, his hand made their way into her dress and inched deeper into her crotch. Wretched though his actions were, his outward appearance remained dignified and aloof. Yan Qingxi lifted her head abruptly. Her expression was icy and her face unemotive. She smiled all of a sudden. Did he really think that she was that depraved and shameless? So be it then, if he wanted to touch her. She chose not to react to any of his advances. She ignored him and chatted up the director and the film editor. When it came to people like Yu Tingfeng, provocation and confrontation were like fuel thrown over a fire. Ignoring him would be the best option. Yan Qingxi did not have a habit of being frugal with her smiles. They were beautiful and irresistible, especially when she was not seducing other men on purpose. Those who laid eyes on that smile would find themselves unable to look away. Sullenness began seeping through Yu Tingfeng's eyes. The film editor seemed very pleased with Yan Qingxi's first impression. A little too much drink opened his floodgates slightly, and he told Yan Qingxi, "Miss Yan, your eyes look beautiful, don't they? They're so lively. Not many women in the entertainment industry have your kind of eyes." Yu Tingfeng said, "Canthoplasty." Slightly embarrassed, the film editor remarked, "Beautifully straight nose. Rhinoplasty. Your breasts are sexy too. Implants." Yan Qingxi's hand was trembling severely as she gripped the glass with full force. How she wished she could just choke his neck and shout at him, "Is there any part of this body that you haven't kissed before? Just King wait if you've got the balls." Miss Mai had enough of it, she was Yan Qingxi's manager, after all. She forced out a smile and said, "Hee CEO you seem to really like cracking jokes." Yu Tingfeng answered coldly, "I don't seem to be laughing." Bang! Yan Qingxi slammed her glass onto the table. A grin crept on her face and she looked particularly dazzling under the light. She then remarked in front of everyone, "CEO why don't you try them out tonight and see whether they're implants?" He leaned back slightly. "Sure." At the dead center on the table, the soup continued bubbling away in the hot pot. Beef balls and vegetables made brief appearances on the surface of the boiling soup. No one said a word or dared to make a single squeak. The atmosphere was cold and stiff, with the sole warmth being that which was emanating from the hot pot. The mood just could not get any more awkward and weird. Miss Mike could no longer bear with what she was hearing, so she fabricated an excuse to bring Yan Qingxi away. "Excuse me. Qingxi, could you accompany me to the bathroom?" "Okay." Yan Qingxi made an attempt to rise from her seat, but her leg was still clasped between Yu Tingfeng's legs. He had no intention of releasing her, and inertia did Yan Qingxi no favors by causing her to fall into him. Yu Tingfeng did not help her up, he simply allowed the fall to happen naturally. Moments later, Yu Tingfeng placed his hand on her waist and caressed her gently. His skin and hers were separated only by her thin clothing. "Miss Yan, are you that eager to throw yourself onto me?"